In 1985, I was working graveyard with this guy. Smart, well-spoken, educated. The kind of guy who always has something to say. One night, we got into a conversation. Politics, history, the Middle East. He started defending Israel's treatment of the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. The usual litany. Curfews, demolitions, military checkpoints. I pushed back. I said, "You really think that's justified?" Without hesitation, he said, "Well, Israel was attacked first, during the Six-Day War." I paused and took a breath. "Wait," I said. "You mean the Six-Day War from 1967? That was nearly 2 decades ago." He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Yeah, so? What do you want us to do? Forget?" And I said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I want you to do." He stared at me like I'd committed some kind of heresy, like I'd spit on a grave. But that moment stuck with me ever since, not because it was heated, but because of what it revealed. How tightly people cling to their pain. How deeply they identify with their wounds. How easily they confuse memory with morality and history with permission. It taught me something. Once grievance becomes sacred, there's no room for grace. Once hurt becomes holy, there's no space left for healing. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We look back to understand the present. We connect the dots. We tell stories. We shape identities. We pass on lessons, not just of what happened, but of what it meant. But memory isn't neutral. It can be curated, distorted. It can become sacred or weaponized. Memory can be a scalpel, precise, healing, a tool for cutting out rot without damaging what still lives. Used well, it helps us grow, helps us remember not to repeat what should have never happened. But memory can also be a knife, a tool for cutting others, a justification for harm. An heirloom of pain passed down like a family blade, sharper with each generation. A nation's memory works the same way, because nations, like people, create stories to explain who they are and why they do what they do. We can remember the Holocaust and say, "Never again, to anyone. No one should suffer what we suffered." We know what it looks like when the world turns its back, and we don't want to be that world. Or you can say, "Never again to us." And because it happened to us, we are forever justified in anything we do to keep it from happening again. Our suffering sanctifies our power. You can remember the Nakba and say, "We were scattered, humiliated, made refugees in our own land." Let's build dignity and peace so that no one else lives this fate. Let our memory open the door to something better. Or you can say, until 1948 is reversed, until the map is rewritten, there can be no peace, only resistance. We are not allowed to forget, so we will not allow anyone else to rest. Because memory isn't just about the past. It's a blueprint for the future. And when that blueprint is soaked in pain and sealed with revenge, what you build is not a home. It's a cycle, a fortress, a prison, a graveyard. Memory is powerful, but power without principle is just vengeance. And vengeance masquerading as justice will burn the world to ash and call it history. Let's walk through this. One side says, we were attacked, we have to defend ourselves. The other side says, we were occupied, displaced, erased. We have the right to resist. And so it begins. Again, a rocket is fired, a child dies, a neighborhood is flattened, a funeral becomes a flashpoint, a checkpoint becomes a killing ground. And each side points back, not days or weeks, but years, decades, to justify what comes next. They started it. They killed first. They made us do this. And every action becomes a reaction. Every atrocity is a response. It's not war anymore. It's theater. Tragedy rehearsed. A pattern worn so deep into the culture that even grief starts to sound like a script. Every death is someone's proof. Every grave is a talking point. And the worst part, it feels righteous. You strike back and it feels like justice. You bury your children and it feels like proof that you were the wronged party. And the only moral response is retaliation. But that righteousness is a lie. Because if the pain you suffered just makes you want someone else to suffer too, then you've become the thing you hated. You've made pain the justification for more pain. And now you're both holding the same weapon, pointing it at each other, screaming about who deserves to bleed more. No one wins that fight. And no one stops it, because everyone thinks they're just responding. Nationalism loves a good wound. It feeds on it. It builds monuments to it. It wraps it in flags and calls it virtue. Because a nation in pain can be mobilized, can be told what to fear, who to blame, who to hate. As long as your pain is bigger than someone else's, as long as your story is the story of suffering, you never have to question what you're doing to others. You can call it defense. You can call it destiny. You can call it justice, even when it's just vengeance in uniform. Israel invokes the Holocaust, rightly but endlessly, as moral cover. A trauma so vast, so unspeakable, that it casts a permanent shadow. And in that shadow, almost anything can be excused. Occupation, bombardment, segregation. Because look at what was done to us. We can never let it happen again, no matter what it takes. Palestinians invoke the Nakba, the catastrophe, the loss of land, of homes, of dignity. Also rightly. And also endlessly. Because it, too, never really ended. It wasn't one moment in 1948. It became a structure, a sentence, an identity. To be Palestinian is, in many ways, to still be displaced. And so neither side sees a way out, because both are still living inside their trauma. Not just remembering it, but reenacting it over and over again. One horror used to justify the next. The Israeli says, "We must control them or they'll destroy us." The Palestinian says, "We must resist them or they'll erase us." And the cycle turns, blood for blood, stone for rocket, strike for strike. When memory becomes religion, mercy becomes heresy. The past becomes holy, and any deviation from it, any call to break the pattern, becomes betrayal. You're either loyal to the wound, or you're the enemy. So when someone like me says, maybe it's time to forget, they don't hear a call to healing. They hear blasphemy, surrender, treason. Because nationalism doesn't want closure. It doesn't want peace. It wants permanence of pain, of power, of myth. But myth isn't memory, and pain isn't destiny. And if we ever want a future that isn't just the past on repeat, we'll have to do the unthinkable. We'll have to stop worshiping the wound. Let's be clear. Remembering the past is important, critical even. It gives us context. It teaches us empathy. It warns us what to watch for, what not to repeat. But living inside the past forever, that's not wisdom. That's not vigilance. That's a prison built from trauma and guarded by pride. What happened to the Jews in Europe, the Holocaust, was a horror. Systematic, industrial, unfathomable. It scarred not just a people, but the soul of the world. What happened to the Palestinians in 1948, the Nakba, was a tragedy, a mass displacement, a shattering of homes, of history, of hope. Entire generations born in exile, knowing nothing but waiting to return. Both are real. Both are devastating. Both deserve remembrance. But neither one justifies bombing hospitals. Not in Tel Aviv, not in Gaza, not anywhere. And neither one justifies murdering civilians. Not at a music festival, not in a refugee camp, not ever. Pain doesn't confer permanent righteousness. It doesn't give you a blank check. It doesn't make every bullet holy. Suffering isn't a shield against scrutiny. You don't get to say, we hurt once, so everything we do is beyond question. That's not justice. That's entitlement in the language of grief. And being a victim once, no matter how grievously, doesn't mean you get to play the victim forever. Especially when you have the power now, the weapons, the walls, the authority, the state. Because at some point, you're not reliving your pain. You're reenacting it on someone else. History is not a moral bank account. You don't get to withdraw justification forever because you made a deposit in blood. You don't get to say our past gives us immunity. It doesn't. If anything, your past should make you more cautious, more humane, more accountable. Otherwise, you're not honoring your suffering. You're just passing it on. Some societies have tried to do something different, something hard, something courageous. They didn't deny the past. They didn't pretend it never happened. But they also refused to be ruled by it. Take South Africa. After apartheid, after generations of racial brutality, they didn't erupt into civil war or burn everything down, although they're getting there, I think. They held truth and reconciliation hearings. Was it perfect? No. Some perpetrators walked free. Some victims never got justice. But it was a public reckoning, a national act of bearing witness. They didn't erase memory, they aired it. And in doing so, they said, we cannot live in denial, but we also cannot live in revenge. Or look at Germany. The country that gave the world the Holocaust didn't turn their guilt into a license to dominate others. They taught the next generations. They faced their shame in school curricula, in monuments, in national dialogue. They didn't just use the memory of suffering as a weapon. They used it as a mirror. Rwanda, too. After the genocide, neighbor against neighbor, machete against machete, they didn't split into a permanent war of retribution. They didn't keep feeding the grudge. Instead, they built systems of local justice. They practiced forgiveness, even when it seemed impossible. And they moved forward, not because they forgot, but because they refused to stay trapped in a cycle of vengeance. All of them, in different ways, said, yes, we remember, but we choose not to stay here. That's the key. They built bridges out of memory, not fortresses. They used history as a tool for connection, not a justification for cruelty. And that takes more than just political will. It takes moral imagination. It takes letting go of the idea that pain is a kind of currency, something you can spend to justify anything forever. Because if you keep hoarding pain like that, if your nation treats trauma as a sacred treasure, and anyone who questions it is a heretic, then all you're building is a shrine to your own victimhood. And that shrine becomes a bunker, a hiding place, a place where empathy dies. So back to that moment, that question, that line I've never been able to let go of. What do you want us to do? Forget? Yes, that's exactly what I want you to do. Not forget the facts, not forget the dead, Not forget the loss or the horror or the grief, but forget the parts that are killing you. Forget the stories that keep you locked in rage. Forget the fantasy that your suffering makes you righteous and that someone else's makes them disposable. Forget the script that says, because it happened to us, we get to do it to them. Forget the idea that vengeance will fix anything, that retribution is redemption, that if you just punish hard enough for long enough, justice will rise from the rubble. It won't. I want you to forget that pain makes you holy. It doesn't. It makes you human, which means it should make you humble, compassionate, soft towards the pain of others, not blind to it. I want you to forget that being the victim once means you get to play the victim forever. That your dead are the only dead who count. That your grief is sacred, but theirs is suspicious. Because until we forget those things, until we lay down the story that our pain justifies anything, we're going to keep trading ghosts for corpses. Their hospitals for your hostage. Their child for your cousin. Their bombed out school for your murdered family. Back and forth, on and on, each side screaming, look at what they did. Each side refusing to ask, what are we doing? And in that endless loop, nobody gets free. Not them, not us, not anyone. So yes, I want you to forget. Not everything, but just enough to stop. Memory can be sacred, a tether to those we've lost, a record of what we've endured, a promise that the truth won't vanish just because it's inconvenient. But when memory becomes a weapon, when it becomes a wall between us and everyone else, when it justifies cruelty in the name of pain, then it stops being a lesson and becomes a curse. A curse we pass down to our children, to theirs. A weight they didn't ask for, but are told they must carry. To honor us, to defend us, to remember. And so the wound never closes because we keep picking at it. Because we've confused hurting others with healing ourselves. But what if we didn't? What if memory didn't have to mean revenge? What if justice didn't mean punishment? What if survival didn't require supremacy? We can carry the pain forward as a reason to destroy, or we can choose to stop, to lay the burden down, to let go, not of the truth, but of the need to make someone else bleed for it. And maybe that starts with the most radical, most uncomfortable, most human thing we could ever say. Yes, forget. Not forget the facts, not forget the lives lost, not forget the history, but forget the hatred. Forget the need to make pain sacred. Forget the lie that says we are only safe if someone else is afraid. Because if memory is a torch, we decide if it lights the way or burns the house down.